So, good evening, everyone. Yeah. Is working? Yeah. Normally around 5 p.m., my brain starts sort of shutting down for the day. And today I've got the job of keeping myself awake. And I'm going to share a little bit. When this topic came up and Jennifer said you got to talk about organic beekeeping, and I was really not sure what the implications of that were, but I took it up. Because for me, organic beekeeping is something we will talk about. It's very fuzzy. It's very fuzzy. And so, I'm also very lazy. So, when Jennifer got two good people to chase us to write the papers. She had Ryan and Mag, Every other day, where's your paper, where's your paper, where's your paper? So, finally, what I did? I told my daughter, I said, why don't you help me out? I was passing on my... And over lunch, I tried to explain to her what I was doing and what I wanted to share. But I was quite surprised. I had just a 10-minute chat with her. And she put down the introduction to what I want to share today. And I will read it out, what she wrote. She's just 16 years old. Why I want to share that is, I think this young generation understands the scenario very well. She doesn't come from any sort of technical background, just a child's enthusiasm to learn. And so I'll just read out a little bit, and then I will share more about bees and honey. In this present day and age, with access to trending terminology and so-called modern-day ideologies, we have come to perceive the concept of organic and organic practices very narrowly. We have started to confine the concept of organic into a specific agricultural box, instead of holistically looking at it in a broader light. The core essence of organic principles have been prevalent for generations, although only recently, over the last 100 years or so, we have come to introduce the terminology organic and associate it within agricultural contexts. The conditioning of looking at organic practices only under an agricultural lens has prevented us from understanding the value of tradition, culture, and indigenous approaches. Many times, products and wild produce may not necessarily be deemed as organic in a legalistic sense, but rather organic in the nature of sustainable harvesting practices. The tradition of collecting wild produce from forests and other natural resources has encountered multiple misconceptions over the years. One primarily being the misunderstanding of the process itself. The philosophy of sustainability and its impactful harvesting is only being recognized very recently, and hence has been misconceived by many due to its novelty. The careful collection and harvesting of natural, wild, and indigenous products can often be misinterpreted as another form of extraction and subtle exploitation of natural resources, often resulting in the thought process that the wild produce available in these regions are subject to intensive derivation every single harvest. Whereas in reality, the thoughtfulness behind sustainability lies in respecting nature and its resources by leaving behind some of the produce in their places during the time of collection. Each country and region has its own uniqueness and individuality embedded in their customs, values, traditions, and practices. Therefore, the acknowledgement and appreciation for these age-old traditions and culture is extremely vital. The preservation of wild produce by itself is a holistic approach to incorporate organic principles on the ground. The preservation of values, traditions, culture, and wild produce in the Asian sphere by itself advocates for the organic movement by its recognition and serves as a catalyst for change by incorporating organic thought processes in diverse ways. Asia as a continent needs to be recognized and appreciated for its diversity, which includes the preservation of unique traditions, values, and cultural practices. Yeah? And so that is the context in which I want to share and talk about bees. Professor Chen was talking about beekeeping a little bit earlier. Yeah? But here is something that I want to share that comes from cultural practices over thousands of years. And I work in an area with indigenous communities. And many a time, we tend to push aside their culture because we want very modern thought processes to be ingrained into them. We don't recognize what they have built into their practices has survived thousands of years. And we are only just learning only a dot of what they have learned and preserved. And so, I share with you a little bit from where I come. I come from the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, which is in the southern part of India. And it incorporates about 5,000 square kilometers, and it's declared so under the Man and Biosphere Program of UNESCO. It's a hot spot. And if you see, it's in this corner where you see the dot, that's the Biosphere Reserve. What is very interesting is there are over 200,000 people representing over 30 indigenous groups, and each one of them special and unique. Their language, their culture, each one of them is unique. Many a times we forget that all these communities, many of them live in such a symbiotic relationship. Each one of them is able to provide to that larger ecosystem very different services. And so just in our area, we had a community which provides the grains. There's another that looks at agricultural implements and blacksmithy. There's a community that collects honey, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And we have another community which collects milk and makes curd out of it also. And so these communities together, they have lived in harmony for these thousands of years. And for us, it is a learning, and maybe a de-learning for us. What they have developed over thousands of years. I want to expand, before we get into honeys, I want to expand that horizon a little bit. Because honey is just a product that we're talking about. And actually, when we are talking about forests and forest ecosystems, we are talking about, again, a very misnomer, non-timber forest produce. And then the new word that came out was minor forest produce. Very colonial thought processes. You know, wood, timber is what gives us revenue. The rest is irrelevant if it doesn't generate revenue. But for these purposes, I'm just using the word non-timber forest produce. And in our country, there is a huge over-extraction that happens. And we are doing it mindlessly, without understanding the consequences. There are number of thousands of families, hundreds and thousands of families who depend on that. What we fail to realize is more than 2/3 of them who go in and collect are women. There are children also who go in and collect. And there is a growing market for non-timber forest produce. And so it's very important in our context that we work not only to understand this, but to be able to build an enterprise around it. And so if you see, and I think this will be valid all across the world, where you have low prices, unfair practices, quality concerns, destructive harvesting in some places, and a lower understanding of what the forest ecosystem is about. But what we need to understand is that it pays to conserve too. Many a time, I've tried to leave out the word certification. It's very restrictive. And I feel it's for us, we need to educate ourselves. There's a huge amount of trade implications. If you go into central India, that's the basic livelihood that exists for hundreds and thousands of people. And we need to be clear that we are understanding that resource and its availability going forward. And will a guarantee help? If we are able to create a system that is able to understand, value this, are we able to create something that will be valued by the customer at their end too? And so constantly for us, we need to talk about ecological monitoring. And ecological monitoring is a term again that we have come up with. I think that's innate in their understanding of forest systems. Yeah? I think Matt was talking about fires, grazing. I think these are all part of the forest ecosystem. And many times we, in our excitement, we try and control these processes. I think we need to understand with them what they have been seeing all along. What is important is that if we are trying to build a system, that we build a chain of custody that is understood by all players in the market. And so for wild produce, this is something that we've been working on, and to see how we can maintain records and be able to communicate that to the customer. From forest produce, one part of it is honey. Just one part of it is honey. There are nuts, there are grasses, and there are all sorts of fruits. And for each one of them, we should be able to understand what is sustainable when the collection is being done. And I think that is the key portion of it. So I'm just talking about bees in India. I put this in brackets because this is a species of bees that has been imported from Europe, which is now destroying the ecosystem in our country because it feeds in a very monoculture manner. And so what the indigenous bees have done over hundreds and thousands of years is they allow pollination to happen in an organic manner so that there is no species which dominates. And I think that's very important for us to understand. We tend to talk about organic, but in a very non-organic way. Yeah? And so we have to understand bees, they feed at different layers of vegetation and they pollinate at those levels. I'll share with you mainly about the Apis dorsata, and this is honey collection that goes on in the wild. These bees, Apis dorsata, are also called the giant Indian rock bees. And for us, it's something that when they feed at the top canopy of the forest flowers. And these bees, the honey they produce in our Indian market, more than 65 to 70% of the honey is from them. But we never acknowledge it. We never acknowledge it. And so if you talk to the community, they will say, no, we've put it inside boxes, we've collected it from the boxes, because that for us is science. Their collection, their methods is not science to us. And I think we need to respect and understand that. When they go into the forest, this activity is something that is sacred to them. And so there will be groups from different villages who go in. They will make the ladder. This ladder is not made out of rope, what we see today. We see rope and we think we can make a ladder out of that. This is out of forest vines. And each time they go to collect honey, they will collect only a particular vine, because that's their faith. On that particular vine, you go to the next village, they will have a faith on a completely different vine. They make those ladders, and then they go and collect. We will just see a short video, but this could be 200 feet. What keeps them doing that year after year? There's no protection involved. It's their culture, their tradition, their faith. And it's something that we can't explain. I think very importantly, before we see the video, is also to understand that we tend to homogenize everything in our eagerness to build a system that will work across continents, across states, across countries. We tend to homogenize. But we need to realize, even by one species of bees, that's the kind of honey you can get. And it's all good honey. It's all pure honey. Tastes will differ. Consistency will differ. Color will differ. And I think we need to appreciate and respect that. We'll see a short video right now, and that will show the kind of honey collection that they do. No? I think something that I will share while we see this, before we see this video, is when I shared that they go as groups, I think the entire thing, the entire activity is based on trust. Because when you do an activity like this, when you come down 200 feet, 300 feet, you need to trust your team. Well, I thought it appeared. And so, it's never a family that goes out. It's a set of people who trust each other. And you have to trust all the way. And so when you saw that ladder, keeping us in suspense,
ಮುತ್ತಿಗೆ
And so that's honey collection in our area. When we first saw it, we were as shocked and wonderstruck. But for us, we realized that this is something that they have been doing for thousands of years. And one of the first things that we wanted to do was, why do they make the rope every time? Why this effort of spending 3 days together as a group at making a rope? And what we did was, we asked them, we will buy you the rope. And so thankfully, they didn't come down that rope. They only used that rope to bring down the honey basket. Within seconds, we realized, when it rubbed against the rock, and that's why they do it fresh every time. Because the green wine keeps them going. And that doesn't cut. And so, when you see the person who's on the top is always the brother-in-law of the person who's come down. Because if anything happens to this guy, his sister is going to be a widow. Yeah? We may have, a lot of logic and a lot of reasoning, but they have something very simple which keeps them together. You don't have a brother-in-law, you still have somebody you trust who guards that rope where it is. As you grow older, you become the one who is giving the directions. And so we've not seen, but we've heard, where then young kids who are just 2 years old, they're tied, brought down that ladder, so that they don't have any fear of the bees. And they do that generation after generation. And so for us, it was just a learning process. A little bit around bees and honey, we have a debate within our country talking about natural versus processed, indigenous bees versus imported bees, constant regulatory changes, diseases that come in, and a whole range of issues. I will not go into that. That will take a lot of time, but we can discuss that later. And so for us, this honey, with all its values, with all its culture, how do you take that out into the market? How do you communicate that to the customer? And I think it's very important. I mentioned that in the morning too. We have the producer, the person who's harvesting, who's collecting, and we have the customer at the other end. And we need that customer to become as engaged as we want the producer to be. And so for us to be able to tell this story to the customer. And so just a few photographs that will just show you what we're trying to do with the products. And so from the honey, you have the beeswax. Beeswax which was wasted and thrown away. Today it can be made into lip balms, it can be made into soaps. To be able to talk about values to the customer, so whether it talks about fair trade, it talks about organic, whether it talks about slow food, and there are many other stories that you can talk about. But constantly you need to engage with the customer and tell them. I think very important for us has been to talk to customers about ecosystem services. Because these bees, the flora, the fauna of these forests, they provide services to us which is way beyond value that we can allocate or where we can price it. Even this terminology of ecosystem services sometimes is a terminology that reflects that we look everything from a revenue perspective. But even these are some things that for the customers, they need to understand, and we need to be able to talk that language. And so these are just photographs of products. So when you talk about, and you can talk about honey, you can package it and sell it to the customers and take it into the market, telling this story. You can do also a range when you talk about flora and fauna from your area. And so for us, which is a biosphere reserve, it is important that we talk this story to the customers. Yeah, so I want to close there. And that's something that as a team that we have been able to build across institutions and being able to take on the market. So honey and bees is something that we can talk about for a long time, but I think it's important that we realize that they bring a special value into our lives, and we need to value it in return. Thank you.